Hi everyone. Tonight I'm gonna be reading you a book. I'm gonna be reading you to sleep. So grab your blankies and your pillows and relax. I hope you enjoy my reading. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Prologue. Silence of 3 parts. It was night again. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts. The most obvious part was a hollow, echoing quiet, made by things that were lacking. If there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees, set the inn's sign creaking on its hooks, and brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. If there had been a crowd, even a handful of men inside the inn, they would have filled the silence with conversation and laughter. The clatter and clamor one expects from a drinking house during the night's dark hours. If there had been music. But no, of course there was no music. In fact, there were none of these things. And so the silence remained. Inside the Waystone, a pair of men huddled at one corner of the bar. They drank with quiet determination, avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. In doing this, they added a small, sullen silence to the larger hollow one. It made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. The third silence was not an easy thing to notice. If you listened for an hour, you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor underfoot, and in the rough, splintering barrels beneath the bar. It was in the weight of the black stone hearth that held the heat of a long dead fire. It was in the slow back and forth of white linen cloth rubbing along the grain of the bar, and it was in the hands of the man who stood there, polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. The man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with a subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. The waystone was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide, as autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river smooth stone. It was the patient cut flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. Chapter 1. A place for demons. It was felling night. And the usual crowd had gathered at the Waystone Inn. 5 wasn't much a crowd, but 5 was as many as the Waystone has ever seen these days, times being what they were. Old Cobb was filling his role as storyteller, an advisor, an advice dispenser. The men at the bar sipped their drinks and listened. In the back room, a young innkeeper stood out of sight behind the door, smiling as he listened to the details of a familiar story. When he awoke, Taborlin the Great found himself locked in a high tower. They had taken his sword and stripped him of his tools. Key, coin, and candle were all gone. But that weren't even the worst of it, you see. Cobb paused for effect, 'cause the lamps on the wall were burning blue. Bram, Jake, and Shep nodded to themselves. The 3 friends had grown up together, listening to Cobb's stories and ignoring his advice. Cobb peered closely at the newer, more attractive member of his small audience, the smith's apprentice. Do you know what that means, boy? Everyone called the smith's apprentice boy, despite the fact that he was a hand taller than anyone there. Small towns being what they are, he would most likely remain boy until his beard fell out. or he bloodied someone's nose over the matter. The boy gave a slow nod. The Chandran. That's right, Cobb said approvingly. The Chandrian. Everyone knows that blue fire is one of their signs. Now he was. But how'd they find him? The boy interrupted. And why didn't they kill him when they had the chance? Hush now. You'll get all the answers before the end, Jake said. Just let him tell you it. No need for all that, Jake, Ram said. Boy's just curious. Drink your drink. I drank me drink already, Jake grumbled. I need another. But the innkeeper's still skinning rats in the back room. He raised his voice and knocked his empty mug hollowly on top of the mahogany bar. Oi, we're thirsty men in here. The innkeeper appeared with 5 bottles. The innkeeper appeared with 5 bowls of stew and 2 warm loaves of bread. He pulled more beer for Jake, for Shep and Old Cobb. Moving with an air of bustling efficiency. The story was set aside while the men tended to their dinners. Old Cobb tucked away his bowl of stew with the predatory efficiency of a lifetime bachelor. The others were still blowing steam off their bowls when he finished the last of his loaf and returned to his story. Now Taberlin needed to escape, but when he looked around, he saw his cell had no door, no windows, and all around him was nothing but smooth, hard stone. It was a cell no man had ever escaped. But Taberlin knew the names of all things. And so all things were his to command. He said to the stone, "Break," and the stone broke. The wall tore like a piece of paper. And through that hole, Taberlin could see the sky and breathe the sweet spring air. He stepped to the edge, looking down, and without a second thought, he stepped out into the open air. The boy's eyes widened. He didn't. Cobb nodded seriously. So Taberlin fell. But he did not despair, for he knew the name of the wind. And so the wind obeyed him. He spoke to the wind, and it cradled and caressed him. It bore him to the ground as gently as a puff of thistledown, and set him on his feet softly as a mother's kiss. And when he got to the ground and felt his side where they stabbed him. He saw it. It weren't hardly a scratch. Now maybe it was just a piece of luck. Cobb tapped to the side of his nose knowingly. Or maybe it had something to do with the amulet he was wearing under his shirt. What amulet? The boy asked, eagerly through a mouthful of stew. Old Cobb leaned back on his stool, glad for the chance to elaborate. A few days earlier, Taborlin had met a tinker on the road. And even though Taborlin didn't have much to eat, he shared his dinner with the old man. Right sensible thing to do, Graham said, quietly to the boy. Everyone knows a tinker pays for kindness twice. No, Jake grumbled. Get it right. A tinker's advice pays kindness twice. The innkeeper spoke up for the first time that night. Actually, you're missing more than half, he said, standing in the doorway behind the bar. A tinker's debt is always paid, one for any simple trade, twice for freely given aid, thrice for any insult made. The minute the bar seemed almost surprised, the coat standing there. They'd been coming to the Waystone every felling night for months, and Coat had never interjected anything of his own before. Not that you could expect anything else, really. He'd only been in town for a year or so. He was still a stranger. The smith's apprentice had lived here since he was 11. And he was still referred to as that Ranish boy. As if Ranish were some foreign country and not a town less than 30 miles away. Just something I heard once, Coat said. To fill the silence, obviously embarrassed. Old Cobb nodded before he cleared his throat and launched back into his story. Now this amulet was worth a whole bucket of gold royals. But on account of Taborlin's kindness, the tinker sold it to him for nothing but an iron penny, a copper penny, and a silver penny. It was black as a winter night, and cold as ice to touch. But so long as it was round his neck, Taborlin would be safe from harm of evil things, demons and such. I'd give a good piece for such things these days, Shep said darkly. He had drunk most and talked least over the course of the evening. Everyone knew that something bad had happened out at his farm last kindling night. But since they were good friends, they knew better than to press him for the details. At least not this early in the evening, not as sober as they were. Aye, who wouldn't? Old Cobb said, judiciously, taking a long drink. I didn't know that Chandrian were demons, the boy said. I'd heard. They ain't demons, Jake said. They were the first 6 people to refuse Telu's choice of the path, and he cursed them to wander the corners. Are you telling this story, Jacob Walker? Cobb said sharply. If you are, I'll let you get on with it. The 2 men glared at each other for a long moment. Eventually, Jake looked away, muttering something that could conceivably be an apology. Bob turned back to the boy. That's the mystery of the Chandrian, he explained. Where do they come from? Where do they go after they've done their bloody deeds? Are they men who sold their souls? Demons? Spirits? No one knows. Cobb shot Jake a profoundly disdainful look, though every half-wit claims he knows. The story fell further into bickering at this point about the nature of the Chandrian, the signs that showed their presence to the weary, and whether the amulet would protect Chamberlain. Things were getting heated when the front door banged open. Jake looked over. About time you got in, Carter. Tell this damn fool the differences between a demon and a dog. Everybody. Jake stopped mid-sentence and rushed to the door. God's body, what happened? Carter stepped into the light, his face pale and smeared with blood. He clutched an old saddle blanket to his chest. It was odd, an awkward shape, as if it were wrapped around a tangle of kindling sticks. His friends jumped up off their stools and hurried over to the side of him. "I'm fine," he said, as he made his slow way into the common room. His eyes were wild around the edges, like a skittish horse. I'm fine. He dropped the bundle into the nearest table, where it knocked against the hard wood, as if it were full of stones. His clothes were crisscrossed with long, straight cuts. His gray shirt hung in loose tatters, except where it stuck to his body, stained a dark, sullen red. Graham tried to ease him into a chair. "Mother of God, sit down, Carter. What happened to you? Sit down." Carter shook his head stubbornly. "I told you, I'm fine. I'm not hurt that bad." "How many were there?" Graham said. "One," Carter said. "But it's not what you think." "God damn it, I told you, Carter." Old Cobb burst out with the sort of frightened anger only relatives and close friends can muster. "I told you for months now you can't go out alone. Not even as far as Baden. It ain't safe." Jake laid a hand on the old man's arm, quieting him. "Just take a sit," Graham said, still trying to steer Carter into the chair. "Let's get that shirt off you and get you cleaned up." Carter shook his head. "I'm fine. I got cut up a little. But the blood is mostly Nellie's. It jumped on her. Killed her about 2 miles out of town past the old stone bridge." A moment of serious silence followed the news. The Smith's apprentice laid a sympathetic hand on Carter's shoulder. "Damn, that's hard. She was a gentle lamb, too. Never tried to bite or kick when you brought her in for shoes. Best horse in town. Damn, He trailed off. "Damn, I don't know what to say." He looked around helplessly. Cobb managed to free himself from Jake. "I told you," he repeated, shaking a finger in Carter's direction. "There's folks out lately that would kill you for a pair of pennies, let alone a horse and cart. What are you gonna do now? Pull it yourself?" There was a moment of uncomfortable quiet. Jake and Cobb glared at each other, while the rest seemed lost for words, unsure of how to comfort their friend. The innkeeper moved carefully through the silence. Arms full, he stepped nimbly around Shep and began to arrange some items on a nearby table. A bowl of hot water, shears, some clean linen, few glass bottles, needle and gut. This never would have happened if he'd listened to me in the first place, old Cobb muttered. Jake tried to quiet him, but Cobb brushed the younger man aside. I'm just telling the truth. It's a damn shame about Nellie. But he better listen now, or he'll end up dead. You don't get lucky twice with these sort of men. Carter's mouth made a thin line. He reached out and pulled the edge of a bloody blanket. Whatever was inside flipped over once and snagged on the cloth. Carter tugged harder and there was a clatter like a bag of flat river stones upended onto the table. It was a spider, as large as a wagon wheel, black as slate. The smith's apprentice jumped backwards and hit a table, knocking it over and almost falling onto the ground himself. Bob's face went slack. Graham, Shep, and Jake made wordless, startled sounds and moved away, raising their hands to their faces. Carter took a step backwards. That was almost like a nervous twitch. Silence filled the room like a quiet sweat. The innkeeper frowned. They can't have made it this far west yet, he said softly. If not for the silence, it is unlikely anyone would have heard him. But they did. Their eyes pulled away from the thing on the table to stare mutely at the red-haired man. Jake found his voice first. You know what this is? The innkeeper's eyes were distant. Scrael, he said distractedly. I thought the mountains. Scrael, Jake broke in. Blackened body of God code. You've seen these things before? What? The red-haired innkeeper looked up as sharply, as suddenly remembering where he was. Oh, no, of course not. Seeing that he was the only one within the arm's length of the dark thing, took a measured step away. Just something I heard. They stared at him. You remember the trader that came through 2 span ago? They all nodded. Bastard tried to charge me 10 pennies for half a pound of salt, Alf said reflexively, repeating the complaint for perhaps the 100th time. Wish I'd bought some, Jake grumbled. Graham nodded a silent agreement. He was a filthy shim, Bob spat, seeming to find comfort in familiar words. I might pay 2 in tight time, but 10 is robbery. Not if there are more of those on the road, Shep said darkly. All eyes went back to the thing on the table. He told me he'd heard them over near the mountains, Coat said, quickly, watching everyone's faces as they studied the thing on the table. I thought he was just trying to drive up prices. What else did he say? Carter asked. The innkeeper looked thoughtful for a moment. then shrugged. I didn't get the whole story. He was only in town for a couple hours. I don't like spiders, the smith's apprentice said. He remained on the other side of the table, some 15 feet away. Cover it up. It's not a spider, Jake said. It's got no eyes. It's got no mouth either, Carter pointed out. How does it eat? What does it eat? Shep said darkly. The innkeeper continued to eye the thing curiously. He leaned closer, stretching out a hand. Everyone edged even further away from the table. Careful, Carter said. Its feet are sharp like knives. More like razors, Coates said. His long fingers brushed the thin, black, featureless body. It's smooth and hard like pottery. Don't go messing with it, the smith's apprentice said. Moving carefully, the innkeeper took one long, smooth leg and tried to break it with both his hands, like a stick. Not pottery, he amended. He set it against the edge of the table and leaned his weight against it. It broke with a sharp crack. More like stone. He looked up at Carter. How did it get all these cracks? He pointed to the thin fractures, crazed the smooth black surface on its body. Nellie fell on it, Carter said. It jumped out of a tree and started to climb all over her, cutting her up with its feet. It moved so fast I didn't even know what was going on. Carter finally sank in the chair at Graham's urging. She got tangled in her harness and fell on it, broke some of its legs. Then it came after me, got on me, crawling all over. He crossed his arms in front of his bloody chest and shuddered. I managed to get it off of me and stomped it as hard as I could. Then it got on me again. He trailed off, his face ashen. The innkeeper nodded to himself as he continued to prod the thing. There's no blood, no organs, it's just gray inside. He poked it with a finger, like a mushroom. Great Telu, just leave it alone, the smith's apprentice begged. Sometimes spiders twitch after you kill them. Listen to yourself, Cobb said scathingly. Spiders don't get as big as pigs. You know what this is? He looked around, making eye contact with each of them. It's a demon. They looked at the broken thing. Oh, come on now, Jake said, disagreeing mostly out of habit. It's not like he made an inarticulate gesture. It just can't. Everyone knew what he was thinking. Certainly there were demons in the world, but they were like Telu's angels. They were like horses and kings. They belonged in stories. They belonged out there. Aberlin the Great called up fire and lightning to destroy demons. Telu broke them in his hands and sent them howling into nameless void. Your childhood friend didn't stomp one to death on the road to Baden Grit. It's ridiculous. Oat ran his hand through his red hair, then broke the silence. There's no way to tell for sure, he said, reaching out into his pocket. Iron or fire? He brought out a bulging leather purse. And the name of God, Ram pointed out. Demons fear 3 things: cold, iron, plain fire, and the holy name of God. The innkeeper's mouth pressed itself into a straight line that was not quite a frown. Of course, he said, as he emptied his purse onto the table, then fingered through the jumbled coins. Heavy silver talents, thin silver bits, copper jots, broken pennies, and iron drabs. Does anyone have a shim? Just use a drab, Jake said. That's good iron. I don't want good iron, the innkeeper said. A drab has too much carbon in it. It's almost steel. He's right, the smith's apprentice said. Except it's not carbon. You use coke to make steel. Coke and lime. The innkeeper nodded deferentially to the boy. You know best, young master. It's your business after all. His long fingers finally found a shim in the pile of coins. He held it up. Here we are. What will it do? Jake asked. Iron kills demons, Cobb said. But this one's already dead. It might not do anything. One way to find out, the innkeeper met each of their eyes briefly, as if measuring them. Then he turned purposely back to the table, and they edged further away. Oat pressed the iron shim to the black side of the creature. There was a short, sharp cracking sound. like a pine log snapping in a hot fire. Everyone startled, then relaxed when the black thing remained motionless. Bob and the others exchanged shaky smiles, like boys spooked by a ghost story. Their smiles went sour when the room filled with sweet, acrid smell of rotting flowers and burning hair. The innkeeper pressed the shim into the table with a sharp click. "Well," he said, brushing his hands against his apron, "I guess that settles it. What do we do now?" Hours later, the innkeeper stood in the doorway of the waystone and let his eyes relax in the darkness. Footprints of lamplight from the inn's windows fell across the dirt road and the doors of the smithy across the way. It was not a large road, nor well traveled. It didn't seem to lead anywhere, as some roads do. The innkeeper drew a deep breath of autumn air and looked around restlessly, as if wanting something to happen. He called himself Coat. He had chosen the name carefully when he came to this place. He had taken a new name for most of the usual reasons, and for a few unusual ones as well. Not the least of which was the fact that names were important to him. Looking up, he saw 1,000 stars glittering in the deep velvet of a night with no moon. He knew them all. Stories, their names. He knew them in a familiar way, the way he knew his own hands. Looking down, Coat sighed without knowing it and went back inside. He locked the door and shuttered the wide windows of the inn, as if to distance himself from the stars and all their varied names. He swept the floor methodically, catching all the corners. He washed the table and the bar, moving with a patient efficiency. At the end of an hour's work, the water in his bucket was still clean enough for a lady to wash her hands in. Finally, he pulled a stool behind the bar and began to polish the vast array of bottles nestled between the two huge barrels. He wasn't nearly as crisp and efficient about the chores as he had been with the others. And it soon became obvious that polishing was a way to excuse polishing was only an excuse to touch and hold. He even hummed a little, although he did not realize it, and would have stopped himself if he had known. As he turned the bottles in his long, graceful hands, the familiar motion eased a few tired lines from his face, making him seem younger. Certainly not 30. not even near 30. Young for an innkeeper. Young for a man with so many tired lines remaining on his face. Boat came up to the top of the stairs and opened the door. His room was an ostery, almost monkish. There was a black stone fireplace in the center of the room, a pair of chairs, and a small desk. The only other furniture was a narrow bed with a large, dark chest at its foot. Nothing decorated the walls or covered the wooden floor. There were footsteps in the hall, and a young man stepped into the room carrying a bowl of stew that steamed and smelled of pepper. He was a dark and charming, with a quick smile and cunning eyes. "You haven't been this late in the span of days," he said as he handed over the bowl. "There must have been good stories tonight, Rishi." Rishi was another one of the innkeeper's nicknames, a nickname almost. The sound of it tugged one corner of his mouth into a weary smile as he sank into a deep chair in front of the fire. "So what did you learn today, Bast?" "Today, Master, I learned why great lovers have better eyesight than great scholars." "Why is that, Bast?" he asked, amusement touching the edges of his voice. Bast closed the door and returned to sit in the second chair, turning it to face his teacher and the fire. He moved with a strange delicacy and grace, as if he were close to dancing. "Well, Reishi, all the rich books are found inside where the light is bad, but lovely girls tend to be out in the sunshine, and therefore much easier to study without risk of injuring one's eyes." Coat nodded. But an exceptionally clever student could take a book outside, thus bettering himself without fear of lessening much loved faculty of sight. "I thought the same thing, Rishi, being, of course, an exceptionally clever student. Of course. But when I found a place in the sun where I could read, a beautiful girl came along and kept me from doing anything of the sort." Bast finished with a flourish. Coat sighed. "Am I correct in assuming you didn't manage to read any of Selim Tincture today?" Bast managed to look amused. Bast managed to look ashamed. Looking into the fire, Coat tried to assume a stern face and failed. "Ah, Bast, I hope she was lovely as a warm wind in the shade. I'm a bad teacher to say it, but I'm glad. I don't feel up to a long bout of lessons right now. was a moment of silence. Carter was attacked by a skraeling tonight. Best's easy smile fell away like a cracked mask, leaving his face stricken and pale. The skrael. He came halfway to his feet, as if he would bolt from the room, then gave another embarrassed frown and forced himself back down into his chair. How do you know? Who found his body? He's still alive, Bast. He fought it back. There was only one. There's no such thing as one skraeling, Bast said flatly. You know that. I know, Coat said. The fact remains that there was only one. And he killed it? Bast said. Couldn't have been a skraeling. Maybe... Bast, it was one of the skrael. I saw it. Coates gave him a serious look. He was lucky, that's all. Even so, he was badly hurt. 48 stitches. I used up nearly all my gut. Coat picked his bowl of stew up. If anyone asks, tell them my grandfather was a caravan guard who taught me how to clean and stitch a wound. They were too shocked to ask about it tonight, but tomorrow some of them might get curious. I don't want that. He blew into his bowl, raising a cloud of steam around his face. What did you do with the body? I didn't do anything with it, Coat said pointedly. I am just an innkeeper. This sort of thing is quite beyond me. Reishi, you can't just let them muddle through this on their own, Coat said. Coat sighed. They took it to the priest. He did all the right things for all the wrong reasons. Bast opened his mouth. Coat continued before he could say anything. Yes, I made sure the pit was deep enough. Yes, I made sure that there was rowan wood in the fire. And yes, I made sure it burned long and hot before they buried it. And yes, I made sure that no one kept a piece of it as a souvenir. He scowled, his eyebrows drawing together. I'm not an idiot, you know. Bast visibly relaxed, settling back in his chair. I know you're not, Reishi. But I wouldn't trust half these people to piss leeward without help. He looked thoughtful for a moment. I can't imagine why there was only one. Maybe they died coming over the mountains, Coat suggested. All but this one. It's possible, Bast admitted reluctantly. Maybe it was that storm from a couple days back, Coat pointed out. A real wagon tipper, as we used to say back in the troop. All the wind and rain might have scattered one loose from the pack. I like your first idea better, Reishi, Bast said uncomfortably. 3 or 4 skrael would go through this town like a hot knife through butter. More like several hot knives through several dozen farmers, Bast said dryly. These people can't defend themselves. I bet there aren't 6 swords in this whole town. Not that swords would do much against Grail. There was a long moment of thoughtful silence. After a moment, Bask began to fidget. Any news? Coach shook his head. They didn't get the news tonight. Carter disrupted things while they were still telling stories. That's something, I suppose. They'll be back tomorrow. It'll give me something to do. I think I'm gonna end it there tonight. My voice is waning. Thank you all for the subs and the follows. Thank you for listening to me read. Sorry my voice kept kind of being weird. I hope you all sleep well tonight. And never forget that I love you all so very much. Bye!